I was lying on the bathroom floor, dizzy from an ulcer, clutching my side. My wife stepped over me, rolled her eyes, and said, "If you're gonna die, do it quietly. The kids already think you're pathetic." I tried to get up. She flushed the toilet, walked out, and slammed the door. I drove myself to the ER. The cold tiles pressed against my cheek as I fought waves of nausea. Blood mixed with bile in my mouth, and the pain in my gut felt like someone was twisting a rusty knife. Jenna's designer heels had clicked past my head without even a pause, not a single word of concern, just annoyance that I was inconveniencing her evening routine. "Ryan, seriously, get up," she'd said from the doorway, checking her phone. "Maya's picking me up in 10 minutes for wine night, and I don't need you being dramatic right now." That's when I knew something was seriously wrong, not just with my stomach, but with everything. The woman I'd married 12 years ago wouldn't have stepped over a dying dog, let alone her husband. But here was Jenna, more concerned about her social calendar than the fact that I was literally bleeding internally. I crawled to the bedroom, grabbed my keys from the nightstand, and somehow made it to my truck. The drive to Mercy General was a blur of red lights and sharp turns that sent fresh waves of agony through my abdomen. I kept thinking about Jenna's words. "The kids already think you're pathetic." Did they really? Emma was only 8 and Jake was 11. Had Jenna been poisoning them against me this whole time? The thought hurt worse than the ulcer. The emergency room was chaos, fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant, and people moaning in various states of distress. I stumbled to the reception desk, probably looking like death warmed over. "I think I'm bleeding internally," I managed to say to the nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes named Patricia according to her badge. She took one look at me and called for a gurney immediately. The next few hours were a medical blur. IV lines, blood draws, CT scans, and finally a surgeon named Dr. Martinez explaining that my ulcer had perforated and I needed emergency surgery. "How long has this been bothering you?" he asked, prepping me for the operating room. "Months," I admitted, "but it got really bad tonight." "Mr. Mallory, if you'd waited another 30 minutes, you would have bled out. This is serious." As they wheeled me into surgery, I gave them my emergency contact information, not Jenna, my brother Charlie. Let her find out when she got home from wine night and discovered I wasn't there to take out the garbage or help Emma with her math homework. I woke up in recovery with Charlie sitting beside my bed, looking worried and angry in equal measure. My older brother had always been my protector, even now that we were both adults. He'd been a cop for 15 years before starting his own security consulting business, and he had that particular expression he got when someone had crossed a line. "How you feeling, little brother?" he asked, squeezing my shoulder gently. "Like I got hit by a truck," I croaked, my throat dry from the anesthesia. "How long was I out?" 6 hours of surgery plus recovery time. It's almost noon." Charlie's jaw was tight. "Want to tell me why your wife doesn't know you're here?" I closed my eyes, remembering Jenna stepping over me like I was a piece of furniture. "She was busy." "Busy?" Charlie's voice rose slightly. "Ryan, you almost died. The doctor said if you'd waited any longer—" "I know." I opened my eyes and looked at my brother. "She told me to die quietly because the kids already think I'm pathetic." Charlie was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. As an ex-cop, he'd seen plenty of domestic situations, and I could practically see him filing this away as evidence of something bigger. "You're coming to stay with me while you recover," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "The kids will be fine. You need rest, and clearly you're not going to get it at home." Charlie's cabin was on the lake, about 20 minutes outside town. It was peaceful there, with pine trees and the sound of water lapping against the dock. For the first time in months, I could actually relax without Jenna criticizing everything I did or didn't do. 2 weeks passed, 2 full weeks, and Jenna didn't call once, didn't text, didn't even send a message through Charlie to ask how I was doing. According to my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, she told the kids I was on a business trip that required emergency surgery, apparently. But Jenna was living her best life. I knew because she posted it all on Instagram. Beach selfies with the girls, dinner at expensive restaurants, shopping trips to Portland, all while I was recovering from nearly bleeding to passing on our bathroom floor. It was in one of those beach photos that I first noticed him. A guy in the background, muscular, younger than me, with the kind of confident smile that screamed CrossFit instructor. I didn't recognize him, but something about the way he was positioned in the shot, like he belonged there, made my stomach clench in a way that had nothing to do with my healing ulcer. His name was Brent Foster, I discovered after some casual social media stalking. 28 years old, owned a CrossFit gym called Iron Will Fitness, married to a woman named Candace who worked in HR at the school district, and apparently he was Jenna's new trainer. What Jenna didn't know, what she'd never bothered to learn in our 12 years of marriage, was that I wasn't the struggling middle manager she constantly mocked. While she saw me as a failure who couldn't even get promoted at the tech company where I worked, the truth was far different. I'd been quietly building my own app development company for the past 8 years, using Charlie's name and address for all the business registration. What started as a side project had grown into something worth $8.2 million. The apps I'd created were being used by major corporations across the country, generating steady revenue that I'd been funneling into investments and offshore accounts. Jenna thought we were barely scraping by because I let her think that. Every time she complained about money, every time she called me a loser for not making more, I just nodded and took it. Meanwhile, I was funding our entire lifestyle while she racked up secret credit card debt, buying designer clothes and expensive dinners with her friends. From Charlie's cabin, I started making some calls. My lawyer, David Brennan, was an old college friend who specialized in asset protection. He'd been handling my business accounts for years, keeping everything separate from my marriage. "Ryan, I'm sorry to hear about your health scare," David said when I called him from the cabin's deck, watching loons dive for fish in the early morning light. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to document everything," I said. "Every transaction, every account, every asset, and I want to hire a private investigator." "Are we talking about divorce proceedings?" "Potentially, but first I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." David recommended a PI named Sarah Chen, a former FBI agent who now ran her own investigation firm. She was thorough, discreet, and expensive, perfect for what I needed. Within a week, Sarah had compiled a comprehensive report on my wife's activities. The financial picture was worse than I'd imagined. Jenna had accumulated $124,000 in credit card debt across 7 different accounts, all in her name only thanks to the prenup she'd laughed at when we got married. She'd been lying about shopping trips, claiming they were for the kids when they were actually feeding her obsession to designer brands. But the financial infidelity was nothing compared to the other kind. Sarah's surveillance photos told the whole story. Jenna and Brent weren't just trainer and client. They were meeting at hotels during his lunch breaks. She was picking him up in her car when his wife thought he was working late. They had their own little routine, their own secret world, while I was home helping the kids with homework and making dinner. The photos were date-stamped. The affair had been going on for 4 months. 4 months of Jenna coming home and criticizing everything about me while she was sleeping with her trainer. 4 months of her rolling her eyes when I tried to be affectionate, claiming she was tired from her workouts. When I finally came home after 3 weeks at Charlie's, Jenna was waiting for me in the kitchen, arms crossed, face flushed with righteous anger. "How dare you abandon us like that?" she started before I'd even set down my bag. "Do you have any idea what I've been through? Taking care of the kids alone, dealing with school pickup, managing everything by myself?" I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I was in the hospital, Jenna. Emergency surgery. You could have called me. You told me to die quietly," I said calmly, watching her face change as she realized I was documenting this conversation. "You stepped over me while I was bleeding internally and went to wine night with Maya. That's not, you're twisting everything." She lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. "Stop recording me." "Why? Afraid of what you might say? You're being paranoid and controlling. This is exactly why—" She stopped herself, but I knew where that sentence was going. Exactly why she'd found comfort in someone else's arms. "Exactly why what, Jenna?" She glared at me, her face red with anger and something that might have been fear. "Nothing. Just turn that thing off." "I don't think I will." I slipped the phone into my pocket, still recording. "You want a divorce? Fine. Let's get divorced." The color drained from her face. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She'd wanted me to beg, to grovel, to promise to be better. Instead, I was calling her bluff. "I didn't say anything about divorce." She backtracked quickly. "You didn't have to. Your actions speak pretty loudly." Over the next few days, I quietly began securing our assets. The house was in my name only, a decision I'd made years ago that Jenna had never questioned because she didn't pay attention to paperwork. I transferred it to a trust that protected it from her debts. The investment accounts, the business assets, the real estate holdings she didn't even know existed, all of it moved beyond her reach. When her credit cards started getting declined, she came to me in a panic. "Something's wrong with the bank," she said, holding a rejected Visa card. "They're saying we're over the limit, but that's impossible." "Which card is that?" I asked, though I already knew. "The Visa, the one for household expenses." "Jenna, That card has a balance of $34,000. The limit is $30,000. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. That can't be right. I pulled out the statements I'd been collecting. Want to see the breakdown? Won $200 at Nordstrom last month, $800 at that new restaurant downtown, $12,300 at the spa in Portland. We needed those things. We needed a $300 facial. We needed a $150 bottle of wine. She grabbed the statements from me, scanning them with growing panic. This isn't right. Someone must have stolen the card information. The charges are all at Places You Go, Jenna, signed with your signature. That's when I saw real fear in her eyes for the first time. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing the lifestyle she'd built on credit and lies. The first domino fell at the school fundraiser. Every year, Lincoln Elementary held a silent auction and dinner to raise money for new playground equipment. It was the kind of event where Jenna could shine, showing off her outfit and gossiping with the other moms while I stood awkwardly by the dessert table. This year was different. This year, I was in charge of the slideshow presentation. Ryan's putting together a wonderful photo montage of our school community, announced Principal Morrison, a cheerful woman in her 50s who genuinely cared about the kids. He's been so generous with his time and technical expertise. I'd volunteered for the job weeks ago, back when I was still playing the role of supportive husband. Now, as I clicked through the carefully curated photos, I had a different purpose. Most of the slideshow was exactly what you'd expect. Kids at school events, teachers in their classrooms, families at various activities. But scattered throughout, almost like accidents, were a few photos from social media, including several of Jenna's beach trip with the girls. The photos themselves were innocent enough. Jenna in her designer bikini, Maya and her other friends laughing and posing. But in the background of 3 different shots was Brent Foster, looking very much like he belonged there. Not like a random stranger who happened to be at the same beach, but like someone who was part of the group. The reaction was immediate. I heard Maya gasp from across the room. Several other women turned to stare at Jenna, who had gone completely pale. The whispers started before the slideshow even finished. Is that the trainer from Ironwill? Why would he be at their girls' trip? Doesn't he have a wife? Jenna bolted for the bathroom, but the damage was done. By the time she emerged, half the room was buzzing with speculation. Maya, her supposed best friend, was already holding court near the silent auction table, explaining to anyone who would listen that she'd had no idea Brent would be there, and that Jenna had insisted on inviting him for safety reasons. I found Jenna by the parking lot, fumbling with her car keys. You did this on purpose, she hissed at me. Did what? Showed pictures of our school community? You know exactly what you did. I showed pictures that you posted publicly on Instagram. If you're embarrassed by them, maybe you shouldn't have posted them. She looked like she wanted to hit me. Instead, she got in her car and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving me to field questions from concerned parents and teachers for the rest of the evening. The next morning, Candace Foster was waiting in the school pickup line when Jenna arrived to drop off the kids. I wasn't there to see it, but according to Mrs. Henderson, who witnessed the whole thing, Candace walked right up to Jenna's car and knocked on the window. We need to talk, Candace had said, loud enough for several other parents to hear. The conversation that followed was brief, but devastating. Candace had done her own investigation after seeing the slideshow photos, and she'd found text messages, hotel receipts, and credit card statements that painted a very clear picture. By noon, Brent had confessed everything to his wife. By evening, Jenna's entire social circle knew about the affair. Her gym membership was revoked. Her standing in the PTA crumbled. The women who had once competed for her attention suddenly found other people to sit with at school events. 2 weeks after the school fundraiser, I was having coffee at Murphy's Diner when Maya walked in with Jennifer Walsh and Susan Chen, 3 women who used to hang on Jenna's every word. They spotted me immediately, and after a brief whispered conference, Maya approached my table. Ryan, can we talk? Maya's voice was different now, less confident, more careful. Sure, have a seat. She slid into the booth across from me, while Jennifer and Susan watched nervously from across the restaurant. Maya had always been the ringleader of Jenna's group, the one who organized the girls' trips and wine nights and shopping expeditions. She was also the biggest gossip in town, which made her both valuable and dangerous. We want you to know that we had no idea, Maya started, fidgeting with her coffee cup, about Jenna and that trainer. If we'd known, you would have what? I interrupted gently. Told me? She looked uncomfortable. Well, I mean, it's complicated, isn't it? Marriage problems are private, and we didn't want to get involved in something that wasn't our business. But you knew something was going on. It wasn't a question, and Maya's face confirmed it. She glanced back at her friends, then leaned forward slightly. There were signs, she admitted, the way she talked about him, how much time she was spending at the gym. And she was different, more secretive. Different how? She stopped talking about you, like completely. Before she'd complain about things, normal married couple stuff, but then she just stopped mentioning you at all. It was like you didn't exist. That stung more than I'd expected. And none of you thought that was strange? We thought maybe you guys were working things out, getting along better. Maya's voice was small now. We didn't realize she was just replacing you. Jennifer and Susan had been watching our conversation with obvious anxiety, and now they approached the table together. Ryan, we're really sorry, Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. We feel terrible about everything. About what, specifically? The three women exchanged glances. Susan, who was usually the quietest of the group, spoke up. About the things we said, about you. Jenna would complain and we went along with it. We made jokes. What kind of jokes? Another uncomfortable silence. Finally, Maya answered. She said you were holding her back, that you had no ambition, no drive. She called you... Maya stopped, looking miserable. She called me what? A loser. She said you were a loser who would never amount to anything and that she was wasting her life taking care of you. The words hit like physical blows, but I kept my expression neutral. And you all agreed with her? We were just being supportive friends, Jennifer said quickly. When someone's venting about their marriage, you listen and you take their side. That's what friends do. Even when they're lying? We didn't know she was lying. About what? About me being a loser or about sleeping with her trainer? The question hung in the air. These women had spent months listening to Jenna trash me, nodding along, probably adding their own criticisms. Now they were faced with the reality that the man they'd been mocking was the sufferer, and the friend they'd been supporting was a liar and a cheat. Both, Maya said finally, her voice barely audible. I stood up, leaving money on the table for my coffee. Well, now you know better. As I walked toward the door, Susan called after me. Ryan, wait. What's going to happen? With you and Jenna, I mean. I turned back to look at the three of them, sitting in their booth, looking lost and guilty. That's not really your concern anymore, is it? The custody battle began in earnest when Jenna realized she was losing everything else. Her friends had abandoned her, her social status was destroyed, and her financial situation was desperate. The kids were her last card to play, and she played it with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose. I want full custody, she announced to her lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Vance who specialized in high-conflict divorces. Ryan is emotionally abusive and financially controlling. I knew about the meeting because Sarah, my private investigator, had contacts everywhere, including the coffee shop next to Patricia Vance's office, where conversations carried through thin walls. Jenna's strategy was simple. Paint me as an abusive husband who had isolated her from her friends and controlled her access to money. She would claim that my recording of our conversations was evidence of controlling behavior, and that my financial decisions were made without her input or consent. It was a smart strategy, except for one problem. I had documentation of everything. When we finally sat down for our first official mediation session, Jenna came armed with tears and accusations. I came with evidence. Mr. Mallory has been systematically isolating my client from her support system, Patricia Vance began, spreading papers across the conference table. He's cut off her access to funds, recorded private conversations without consent, and engaged in a campaign of public humiliation designed to destroy her reputation. My lawyer, David Brennan, smiled politely. That's an interesting narrative. Shall we look at the actual facts? What followed was a methodical destruction of Jenna's claims. David presented bank statements showing her secret credit card accounts, dating back years. He showed receipts for purchases she'd made without my knowledge or consent. He played recordings of conversations where she admitted to lying about her spending. But the most damaging evidence came from the kids themselves. We've spoken with Emma and Jake's teachers, David said, pulling out a thick folder, as well as the school counselor and their pediatrician. The children have been showing signs of emotional distress for months. He read from the school counselor's report. Emma has expressed concern that her parents don't love each other anymore. She's worried that she and her brother are the reason for their problems. Jake has become withdrawn and aggressive, particularly toward authority figures. Both children have mentioned feeling caught in the middle of adult conflicts. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Patricia interjected. The children are suffering because of Mr. Mallory's behavior. Actually, David continued, the timeline is quite specific. The children's behavioral changes began approximately 4 months ago, which coincides exactly with the beginning of Mrs. Mallory's extramarital affair. He presented more evidence, text messages between Jenna and Brent discussing when they could meet without the kids getting suspicious, hotel receipts from afternoons when she was supposed to be at parent-teacher conferences, credit card statements showing expensive dinners for two while she told me she was having girls' nights. Furthermore, David said, his voice taking on a harder edge, we have evidence that Mrs. Mallory has been actively undermining the children's relationship with their father. He played an audio recording that made my stomach clench. It was Emma's voice, small and confused, asking Jenna why Daddy was always working if he didn't make enough money. Because Daddy doesn't try hard enough, Jenna's voice responded. Some people just aren't meant to be successful, sweetheart. That's why Mommy has to take care of everything. The room was silent when the recording ended. Even Patricia Vance looked shaken. Where did you get this? She asked quietly. Mrs. Mallory posted it on her Instagram story, David replied. She thought it was cute. The judge in our case was the Honorable Margaret Chen, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had been handling family court for over 20 years. She'd seen every kind of custody battle, every manipulation tactic, every desperate lie parents told to gain advantage over each other. Judge Chen did not suffer fools. I've reviewed all the evidence presented by both parties, she began, looking stern behind her wire-rimmed glasses. I've also conducted private interviews with both children, as is standard in contested custody cases. Jenna sat rigidly in her chair, her lawyer's hand on her arm in a gesture of support. I could see her jaw clenched tight, her knuckles white where she gripped her purse. Mrs. Mallory, your claims of financial misuse are not supported by the evidence. The prenuptial agreement you signed clearly states that debts incurred individually remain the responsibility of the individual who incurred them. Mr. Mallory was under no legal obligation to cover your credit card expenses, particularly when those expenses were hidden from him. Patricia Vance started to object, but Judge Chen held up a hand. Furthermore, the evidence shows a pattern of deceptive behavior on your part that extends far beyond financial matters. You conducted an extramarital affair for 4 months while living in the family home. You made disparaging remarks about your husband to your children. You failed to seek medical attention for your husband during a life-threatening emergency. Jenna's face was flushed now, her breathing shallow. I could see her starting to panic. Your Honor, Patricia tried again. My client was in an emotionally abusive situation. Ms. Vance, I've heard no credible evidence of emotional misuse by Mr. Mallory. What I have heard is evidence of emotional misuse by your client. The recording of her telling her 8-year-old daughter that Daddy doesn't try hard enough is particularly troubling. Judge Chen turned her attention to me. Mr. Mallory, while your methods of gathering evidence were thorough, I find no indication that you've acted against your children's best interests. The teachers and counselors all report that the children feel safe and supported when they're with you. She paused, consulting her notes. However, I am concerned about the level of conflict between you and your wife, and the impact that conflict is having on Emma and Jake. My heart started to race. Was she going to split custody? Give Jenna partial custody despite everything? Therefore, Judge Chen continued, I am awarding primary physical custody of both children to Mr. Mallory. Mrs. Mallory will have supervised visitation every other weekend, pending completion of a parenting class and family counseling. Jenna shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. You can't. Mrs. Mallory, sit down. He's been planning this whole thing. He's been manipulating everyone. Mrs. Mallory, if you don't sit down and remain quiet, I will hold you in contempt. Jenna's lawyer pulled her back into her chair, but she was shaking with rage now. Additionally, Judge Chen said, Mrs. Mallory will be responsible for child support payments of $800 per month to be deducted directly from her wages. Child support? Jenna's voice was a strangled whisper. But I can't. You are employed, Mrs. Mallory. The court expects you to meet your financial obligations to your children. What Jenna didn't know, what her lawyer hadn't discovered, was that her job was about to disappear. Candace Foster, Brent's wife, worked in HR at the school district. She also had a cousin who managed the insurance office where Jenna worked. Small towns have long memories and interconnected relationships. By the end of the week, Jenna would be unemployed, facing child support payments she couldn't afford, living in a studio apartment above the hardware store because it was all she could afford with her destroyed credit. But that wasn't the end of her problems. 6 months after the custody hearing, I was helping Emma with her science project when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a familiar figure on the front porch, Jenna, looking thinner than I remembered, her designer clothes replaced with discount store outfits. "Kids, go upstairs and work on your homework," I said gently. They obeyed without question, though I caught Emma giving me a worried look. I opened the door but didn't invite Jenna in. "Hi, Ryan." Her voice was small, defeated. "Can we talk?" "About what?" "About us, about the kids, about everything." She looked exhausted. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her makeup was minimal, and I could see dark circles under her eyes. "The kids are doing well," I said. "Their grades have improved, and they're both seeing the school counselor regularly." "I know. I'm glad. That's good." She shifted nervously on the porch. "Ryan, I wanted to apologize." "For what, specifically?" "For everything. For the affair. For the lies. For what I said that night when you were sick." Her voice broke slightly. "I've been thinking about that night a lot. About what I said to you." I waited, saying nothing. "I didn't mean it," she continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. "When I said the kids thought you were pathetic, when I told you to die quietly, I was just angry. I was angry about everything, and I took it out on you." "You were angry about what?" "About my life. About feeling trapped and bored and like nothing I did mattered. About being married to someone who never seemed to notice me anymore." "I noticed you, Jenna. I noticed that you were spending money we didn't have. I noticed that you were never home. I noticed that you criticized everything I did. But you never said anything. You just took it. You let me walk all over you, and it made me lose respect for you." There it was, the truth she'd never admitted before. "So, it's my fault that you cheated." No, that's not what I'm saying." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm saying I was wrong, about everything, about you, about what I wanted, about what was important." I leaned against the doorframe, studying her face. "What do you want, Jenna?" "I want to come home. I want us to try again. I want to be a family." "That's not going to happen." "Why not? People work through affairs all the time. We could go to counseling. We could—" "Because you didn't just have an affair. You emotionally misused me for years. You poisoned our children against me. You left me bleeding on a bathroom floor while you went out with your friends." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I said I was sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix everything, Jenna." "But I've lost everything," she whispered. "My job, my friends, my home. I'm living in a studio apartment and working at a gas station. I can barely afford to eat, let alone pay child support. That's not my problem." "How can you be so cold? We were married for 12 years. We have children together." I stepped back and started to close the door. "The children are happy and healthy. They're doing well in school. They have friends, and they feel safe. That's what matters." "Ryan, please." "Goodbye, Jenna." I closed the door and locked it, then watched through the window as she stood on the porch for a few more minutes before finally walking away. Her car was an old Honda with a dented bumper, a far cry from the BMW she used to drive. That night after the kids were asleep, I went into the master bathroom and looked at the spot where I'd collapsed 6 months earlier. The tiles had been replaced, but I could still remember exactly how they'd felt against my cheek. Cold and unforgiving, like the woman who'd stepped over me. I thought about Jenna's visit, about her tears and apologies. Part of me, a small part, felt sorry for her. She'd lost everything, just as I'd planned. Her social circle, her financial security, her children, her sense of self-worth. She was living the consequences of her choices, and those consequences were harsh. But then I remembered Emma asking me why Mommy said Daddy didn't try hard enough. I remembered Jake withdrawing into himself, afraid to show affection because he'd learned that love was conditional. I remembered lying on cold bathroom tiles, bleeding internally, while my wife complained about being inconvenienced. Some floors you fall to, some floors you rise from. 3 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Jenna's handwriting, shaky and desperate. "Ryan, I know you'll probably throw this away without reading it, but I had to try one more time. I've been going to therapy, and I'm starting to understand how badly I hurt you and the kids. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for another chance. I just want you to know that I realize now what I lost. You were never the failure I said you were. I was the failure. I failed as a wife, as a mother, as a human being. I'm sorry for stepping over you that night. I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday the kids can forgive me. Jenna. I read the letter twice, then walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was healthier than he'd been in years, stronger, more confident. The kids were thriving, my business was expanding, and for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely happy. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a frame, then hung it on the bathroom wall, right above the spot where I'd almost died, a reminder of the floor where I didn't die and the woman who wished I had. Emma found me there a few minutes later. Dad, are you okay? I picked up my daughter and hugged her tight. I'm perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. And for the first time in 12 years, that was completely true.